So thank you all very much for coming and welcome. To give you just a little bit of a background, Voice of the Faithful started in 2002 at the same time as the National Voice of the Faithful started in Boston when it was a reaction to the clergy sex abuse crisis in the Catholic Church. And we as a national organization and as a local organization have continued till then. I believe we're one of the very few local branches still existing, still meeting. We meet for liturgies twice a month, and we have educational programs such as we have tonight. I think that over the years, we've had more than 150 speakers. We've had theologians, social justice ministers and advocates, and speakers from many faith traditions. The speakers that we hope move us more toward our 4 goals. Our first 2 goals grow directly out of our Voice of the Faithful roots to support survivor victims of clergy sex abuse and to support priests of integrity. Today's program grows out of our last 2 goals to support and advocate for those striving to proclaim an expanded image of God compatible with science and theology in the 21st century, and to provide educational and spiritual opportunities for our community and for others. These days, there's not much that goes on and crosses our screens that doesn't have a small ad. So forgive us if we have a small pitch and a small ask to make for you. We never charge for any of our programs. Everything is free. And we're on Zoom, so we don't have that many expenses, but we do have some. So we would be most grateful for any donation that you would care to make so that we can continue bringing programs like this. Our website is www.votfnj.org, but it's in the chat as well. And we would be very grateful for anything you choose to do. But on the website, you can also learn more about us. And you will find audio and visual links, video links in our library to our past speakers, which may be of interest to some of you. So that's the end of my messaging. Now on to today's program. We will first have a short musical interlude, and then after that, one of our program committee members, Mary Gannon, will introduce our speaker. Once again, welcome. Thank you.
Advocate for peace with every land. May contentment reign within this land and in our home. Grant us peace, your most holy, precious gift, O eternal source of peace. May friendship's bonds be strengthened between peoples of each land. May you plant the seeds of virtue deep within each soul. Hallowed be your name and loved in every heart and home. May all your children on this earth lay down the tools of war. May we be the instruments of healing and of hope. Turn our hearts from fear and hate to walk the path of peace. Grant us peace, your most holy, precious gift, O eternal source of peace. May leaders seek the way of truth and live your law of love. Mending wounds of war and giving hope to all oppressed. Plant your mercy in their hearts, give vision to their sight.
thank you, Charlie and Carol. As a co-chair of Voice of the Faithful Program Committee, I have the pleasure today of introducing our speaker, Rabbi Sharon Brous. A little background. The most important fact about Rabbi Sharon is that she is a Jersey girl. Born in New Jersey, raised in Short Hills and Livingston, she went to Milburn Junior High School and high school and worked with her grandparents' appliance store named Sam Gordon's in Madison, New Jersey. When her grandparents retired, her mother, Marcia, who was raised in Madison, and her dad, Rick, took over the store. She put many hours working there over her teenage years. She attended Columbia University and the Jewish Theological Seminary on the Upper West Side in Manhattan. She left the East Coast after she and her fellow Columbia classmate graduated and married. They have raised their 3 children in Los Angeles. It was there that Rabbi Sharon co-founded ECAR. ECAR is a non-denominational Jewish community centered on spirituality, searching, and learning. She has a passion for the Talmud and for social justice. She has been named the most influential rabbi in the U.S. by the Daily Beast. Her story is fascinating and inspirational, and we have included it in the chat so that you can learn more about her. Please read it, it's great. We are thrilled to have you with us today, as we hold the belief that the world, despite its flaws, can be made better through human effort, kindness, and wisdom. Rabbi Sharon.
Thank you, Mary. What a joy to be with all of you today. Thank you, Carol and Charlie and everybody else who worked to put this together. I'm honored to be with you, and I'm thrilled to know that you exist. I'm already inspired just to hear the mission of this organization and to see the way that you've come together over these years to really put a stake in the ground for a different kind of vision of what a faith community could look like. So thank you for having me. What I think I'll do is speak a little bit about the book and about the big idea behind the book, which I think is needed in this time more than ever. And then I would love to be in conversation with you. I know that we have some time designated for Q&A. So I will start by sharing a bit about the background to why I wrote this book and what I see as the great challenges that we're facing in our time and what we can do about it. So, as Mary said, I grew up on the East Coast, and when I came out to Los Angeles in about 2004, in 2002, when I was a young rabbi, I was living in New York City at the time of 9/11, serving at the end of my rabbinical school years, end of my seminary years, and my first couple of years working full time in the rabbinate there, serving in a very vital community on the Upper West Side. And then I came out to Los Angeles and we built a community out here that really was designed to stand at the intersection of a revitalized Jewish spiritual practice and social justice. We wanted to identify where the pain was in human society and see what we could do to build a more just and loving society. And the community really took off. I was 29 when we started. And so most of the people who came into the community were in their 20s and 30s. It was a really striking demographic reality that contrasted with the reality in most of the synagogues around the country at the time. There were a lot of studies being done that showed that young people weren't interested in religion and that the synagogues were really facing a crisis because most of the people were the age of my grandparents, not my age. And then we built this community, and a lot of people were resonating to the ideas and the vision of the community. And we really were growing very quickly for about the first 10 years. And then about 10 years in, I started to notice a trend in the community, a pastoral trend, which is that many of the people who are coming in to see me one-on-one were talking about their broken hearts. They were talking about a deep sense of loneliness, of social alienation, isolation, a lack of purpose, and a sense of disconnection from one another, from community, and from a broader connective tissue in our society. And this surprised me because we were this very vital, young, engaged community of people who were really working to fight for justice, both in Los Angeles and nationally and around the world. And I was really struck by how brokenhearted people were. We could all get behind that shared vision and mission. But when it came to the individual, there was a very deep yearning that was not being filled. And I started to study loneliness to see what was going on and to try to understand what stood at the heart of loneliness. And I have to say that now, about more than a decade and a half later, we can map that anecdotal evidence, what I was seeing pastorally, with a global trend, which is around the time of 2012 and 2014, there was a massive spike in loneliness globally. And of course, now we know that it has to do with these devices and the fact that, around the world, billions of people got cell phones and smartphones and started to go onto social media. And it really did great damage to a sense of connective tissue in our communities and our sense. These devices are ostensibly designed to help us connect with each other, but what they ended up doing was making many people fall into a crisis of disconnection. When I began to research and read, I discovered what now might be very obvious to people because we've heard people like the Surgeon General talk a lot about these things in the last couple of years, but that loneliness is not only a spiritual pain, but it's actually does damage to us physically as well. It's quite dangerous physically. And now we know that that acute loneliness is the equivalent of smoking 15 cigarettes a day. That's the kind of damage that it does to our bodies, to our tissue. It leads to inflammation. It can lead to early onset dementia, Alzheimer's, and other adverse health outcomes. I was quite surprised by this at the time, and I realized that if I didn't figure out a way to address loneliness, it was not only going to be breaking our spirits, but also endangering our bodies. And at the same time, I went back and reread Hannah Arendt's book called The Origins of Totalitarianism, which I had read in college or grad school. And I don't know how many of you are familiar with this work, but Hannah Arendt, of course, was the great philosopher writing in the 20th century in the aftermath of the Holocaust. She wrote this work within just the first couple of years after the end of World War II. And she analyzes what was happening in society that made it possible for totalitarian regimes to take over across Europe. And what she writes is absolutely striking, that totalitarianism cannot get a footing in a society unless there is widespread social alienation and loneliness. When people don't know and trust their neighbors, when they don't feel a sense of the collective, a sense of community, there's fertile ground for tyranny and totalitarianism. And this made me feel an even more urgent desire or need to address this crisis because now it's not only threatening our spirits, threatening our bodies, but it's also threatening our democracy, threatening our very safety as Americans and as global citizens. And of course, since then, we can see the rise of totalitarianism all across the world. There is a global trend that we're a part of right now that we're witnessing unfolding, not only in this country, but around the world. I was very concerned about it and desperate to figure out what my tradition, what my Jewish tradition might have to offer that could help us navigate this time. And so I went back and I rediscovered a text that I had found when I was in seminary. And I reread it and I understood it in a completely different light. That text comes from the Mishnah, which is an ancient compendium of Jewish law codified 2,000 years ago in the year 220 CE. And that text becomes the very foundation of my response to what we can do in a world of brokenheartedness, loneliness, social alienation, isolation, threats to our spirit, threats to our communities, threats to our democracy. and I'll tell you how it works. So I have often found that part of the beauty and the bounty that comes from being in a faith community is that we have wisdom that's much older than any of us that can help guide us in how to live lives of meaning and purpose. And so I took very seriously this ritual and have been able to extrapolate from this particular ritual to try to understand not only what's happening, but what we can do about it. So I'll tell you how the ritual works, and I'm excited to talk all of this through with you, and see what you see in it. And by the way, in the book, I made Penguin Random House agree to include the Mishnah itself in the original Hebrew, which you can see at the back of the book. They have printed it in the back of the book, and it's a very terse couple of line text, but I, from it, really extrapolate a whole world of meaning. So, this is what the ritual describes, that in ancient times, when the temple stood in Jerusalem, before the destruction of the temple in the year 70 CE, at pilgrimage rituals, which were Sukkot, Passover, and Shavuot, 3 times a year at least, Jews would come from all across the land and also from the diaspora, because there was already a diaspora at that time. And they would ascend to Jerusalem, which, of course, is a city that's on a hill. Have any of you been to Jerusalem? Yeah, several of you. Okay. So you have to drive up to Jerusalem. It's a city that's on a hill. And when they would get there, they would immerse in the ritual bath and they would prepare themselves for this ritual pilgrimage. And then they would ascend the steps of the Temple Mount of Jerusalem, which is the holiest place in the holiest city in the world on the holiest days. They would walk up the stairs and they would enter through this giant arched entryway right there in the heart of Jerusalem on the Temple Mount. They would turn to the right and they would circle around the perimeter of the courtyard of the Temple Mount, and then they would exit right where they had entered. That was the extent of the pilgrimage ritual. It's like the Hajj in Mecca. If you've seen images of Muslims who come from all around the world on this sacred mission to walk around that place and then and then leave. And there's a holiness that's intrinsic to both the site, but also being a part of this movement of humanity that's there to celebrate that day. Except the text says, for someone who's brokenhearted. A brokenhearted person would go up to Jerusalem, would climb the steps of the Temple Mount, would enter through the same arched entryway, but would turn to the left, whereas everyone else turned to the right. And now you have to imagine hundreds of thousands of people moving in one direction and one brokenhearted person in the same place, but moving in exactly the opposite direction. And here this sacred encounter would occur, in which someone who's walking in this direction, a pilgrim, would look into the eyes of the bereft, the bereaved, the ill, the lonely, the brokenhearted, and would say 2 simple words, ma lach, which in the ancient Hebrew means, tell me what happened to you. Tell me about your heart. And this person would respond saying, my loved one just died and I'm brokenhearted. I don't even want to get out of bed. Or they would say, I'm really worried about my kid. She's not okay. I just need someone to tell me she's going to be okay. Or they would say, my partner left. I did not see it coming, and I don't know how I'm going to live life without him. Whatever was the great pain, the great aching pain in their heart, they would say it out loud. And the stranger who's walking this way would answer them with a blessing. They would say something like, may the one who dwells in this place hold you with love as you navigate this time of pain. And that's it. Then they would each continue on their way, and that was the end of the ritual. And I realized as I re-encountered this text, now aware of the loneliness crisis in our hearts, in our communities, in our society, in our country, that part of what we needed to learn from the ancients was that at precisely the moment when we're most inclined to pull away from each other, to retreat from each other, it's incumbent upon us to turn toward each other, because the people who are going this way, who are having the spiritual peak moment of their lives, they sold their animals and saved their money and journeyed to Jerusalem, risked their lives probably in ancient days. What they want to do is circle around to the right with everybody else who's there circling to the right. But what they have to do is stop and talk to somebody who's been crying, who's going the wrong way, and actually ask them what happened to them. And then we learn that that is the purpose of the ritual, that that's exactly why they're there, is to see somebody who's not well and to ask them about their heart and to remind them that they're not alone in their worst moment. And the person who's going this way, who, as I said before, they don't even want to get out of bed. And we all know this feeling because for all of us, we have had moments where we've experienced loss and illness and brokenheartedness. And it feels so vulnerable to get out of bed and to go show up in a public place and, and to pretend that we're okay when we're not at all okay. And what this ritual says is you have to get up and you have to go, but you don't pretend that you're okay. To pretend you're okay would mean to walk to the right like everybody else and try to blend in with the masses. But we walk to the left so that everybody who sees us can see the pain in our eyes, can see that we're struggling, because only when we expose ourselves to that level of vulnerability are we able to be cared for by a community that wants to see us and will not run away from our pain. And so it's totally counterinstinctual for both parties. And yet that we learn is what it means to be most human in the world. And what I think we need in this time is to counter our instinct to pull away from each other, because your pain is frankly too much for me to hold right now. I'm busy holding my own pain, right? Or I'm finally having a good day. And instead learn how to find our way to each other faithfully and prayerfully. And one of the things that I found most striking about this text is that the people who are brokenhearted don't go there to be blessed by the priests, the Kohanim, and they don't go there to be blessed by the rabbis and by the scholars and by the elders in the community. They go there to be blessed by each other, meaning the regular people who are there are the ones who are engaged in the holiest work of actually seeing each other. And that's where the healing comes. Now, there's one additional piece to this story that I want to share before I open it up to hear your reactions to this, which is that there's another party that turns to the left in addition to the brokenhearted. And that party is called the menudeh in Hebrew. That's the ostracized one. In the ancient world, someone fell into the category of menudeh when they had engaged in offensive actions that actually harmed the community. It's one step short of excommunication, because there's a hope that by distancing this person from community for some limited period of time and saying, you can't learn with the community, you don't go to dinner with the community, you don't go to prayer services with the community, you don't do business with the community, you are in isolation, that they would realize that they'd done something harmful and that they would change and come back into the community. But that person who doesn't go to the services, doesn't go to the businesses, doesn't go into communal and social spaces, does show up on the holiest days in the holiest of places. And when they do, they turn to the left, just like the mourners, just like the brokenhearted and the ill and the people who are holding great worry in their hearts. And when they do, they are met with an open-hearted question. And that question is, tell me about your heart, malach, the very same question. Tell me about your heart. Now imagine saying to the person that has caused you so much pain that the people who love you have said, that person's not even allowed at the Christmas dinner because I remember what they did to you last year. Now imagine if there's one place where they are allowed to show up, and your job, instead of saying to them, you caused pain here, you've hurt so many people, how dare you? Instead saying, tell me about your heart. How are you experiencing this time? And that person responds by saying, I've been ostracized because I've caused pain in the community. And your response to them is the same as your response to the brokenhearted, which is you offer a blessing and you say, may your community learn to see your humanity again and embrace you with love. Or you say, may you learn how your behavior has harmed others and change and grow so that you can once again be welcomed back here. But either way, we give them a blessing. And what I think that says to us is an additional layer of wisdom, which is it's not as hard as it is to turn our hearts to the people who are brokenhearted and actually to show up when somebody has had a loss, when their loss makes us feel vulnerable and makes us feel like I'm just getting back into life after losing my partner. I don't want to go to your funeral and then have to be dragged down into grief again, right? That very human response that many of us have. As hard as that is, that's nothing compared to actually facing not only the people who are coming toward us, but the people who are coming at us with ideas that challenge us, that threaten us, that hurt us. And what the tradition seems to be saying is that our job is to hold curiosity and compassion and grace precisely at the moment that we want to walk away. And instead of holding indignity toward another, bestowing them with dignity because they too are created in God's own image. And how might that change the other? How might that change us? And how might that change the community or the society that we're living in? So what I'm trying to do is excavate from a very ancient tradition an idea that I think can help us navigate these very painful times and help us figure out how to be most human in profoundly inhumane environments. And what I believe that we are being called to do is turn toward each other at precisely the moment that we want to turn away. And I just want to suggest, knowing very little about your group other than what Carol has told me and how you opened this session, is that that's exactly what this group is doing, to turn in a moment of pain and anguish and agony and say, we're going to see each other's humanity. That in its own right is a revolutionary act of love, of grace, of compassion and curiosity, which I think the world very much needs more of. So I'm going to pause there because I would love to hear your thoughts, your questions. Let's be in conversation. Does anyone have any thoughts?
I wondered how long this practice endured and if it's still being practiced anywhere in the world. I'm not aware of any of my Jewish friends
Excuse me.
participating in a ritual like this.
Thank you, Louise. So what I can tell from talking to historians is that there is no certainty that this practice ever actually occurred or did not occur. There's no, aside from the written record of it, we don't know beyond that. It is assumed that a version of this did actually take place in temple times, but not since. But over the last 2 years, as I've been writing and teaching and preaching about this, I have invited communities, Jewish and not Jewish, to take on this practice. And in fact, when I launched my book in my own community in Los Angeles in January and February of 2024, I asked the people who were there to engage in this ritual, and there were about 700 people in the room.
Oh,
And so, what I asked them to do was for everybody to rise in whatever way they were able. And the people who really were okay that day, I mean, everybody's got something weighing on their heart, especially in these times. But the people who felt that they had some spiritual strength in them were to walk to the wall and to turn to the right and start circling in that direction. And the people who, like me, were bereaved, bereft, ill, not well, were going to walk to the wall and circle to the left. My father died just less than 2 months before, actually, he died at the end of August and the book came out in the beginning of January. So he died just a couple of months before the book came out. And in Jewish practice, we are mourners for parents for a full year. And
Mhm.
so I was in the category of an avela, a person who's in grief, and we're actively working through that grief for the year. So I was walking to the left, and I said, if you're like me, I want you to invite you to walk to the left, and everyone else will walk to the right. And your job is to look into the eyes of the people who are walking in this direction and to ask that simple question in Hebrew or in English. Tell me about your heart. What happened to you? And then to hear us and then to give us a blessing. And I would say about 650 people moved this way and about 50 people moved the other way. And we did the ritual. And it was one of the most profound experiences of my life. And afterwards, one of my rabbis who was in the room, who's one of my teachers and a great scholar, he said, we just reenacted a ritual that has not been enacted for 2,000 years. And he said, I could feel the electricity from doing something so old that is so profoundly resonant in our time running through my body. And it was an incredible experience. Everyone was crying because it's so powerful. And I'm the rabbi of this community, and this was my book launch. So most of the people I mean, I know a lot of the people in the room, but there were strangers who were there just for the event of the launch, people I'd never met before, strangers who came up to me and said, Malach, tell me about your heart. And I said, I'm brokenhearted because my father just died a couple of months ago and how he would have loved to have been here tonight. And I would just bawl, and people would bless me and say, I hope the memory of your father lives close inside your heart for a generation to come. Things like that. And it was incredibly moving. So then on the book tour to all different kinds of environments, including one college campus that was torn apart with protests. And I sat in a room with this small group of college leaders. And we didn't get up and walk around like we did when I enacted it, but I started by asking each person, tell me about your heart. And they would respond and say, I'm sick over what's happening. I feel completely torn up. My whole friend group isn't talking to each other anymore over
Mhm.
what's going on campus. And then I gave them a blessing. And then I said, who's next? Who's going to be the next person who's going to ask someone else? So then that person would have to ask another person, tell me about your heart in front of everyone. And they would answer, and then they would get a blessing. And we went around the room this way. I've done this at board meetings. I've done this in large and small rooms. And it's such a powerful way of reclaiming our agency as people who can offer love and grace and compassion in this time. And one of the things I want to add to this, Elise, is that um, my husband said to me right when I finished the manuscript, he said, how do you make this not just a really good sermon where people feel good when they hear it, but they have no idea how to implement this in their lives? And so at his urging, I wrote in the back of the book 8 spiritual practices. There are 8 chapters of the book, 8 applications of this ritual into our lives, including, for the people who are, I'm sure, like some of you on this call, who are either by character, by nature, or by profession, always walking to the right. We are always taking care of other people, always showing up with those lasagna, always making a phone call, always going to the funeral. How do we not fill up with other people's pain, right? How much of that can you actually take in? And who do you let hold you when you're in pain? Because those caregivers are the worst at accepting help, right? When one of those caregiver type people loses someone they love or is going through illness, when you call them, they'll say, no, 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 I'm fine. I don't need the meal train. I'm okay. I can take care of myself. But we also need to be held, right? Caregivers also need to be cared for. And so for each one of the chapters, including the caregiver chapter and then the others, I have one spiritual practice that each one of us can take on. And again, this book was written rooted in Jewish wisdom, but it wasn't written for Jews. It was really written for a broad audience. That's why Penguin Random House took it instead of a Jewish. I didn't want to go to a Jewish publisher. I wanted to go to a mainstream publisher. And the most interesting conversations I've had have been with church groups, by the way, because there's a resonance, because it's the same sacred text for all of us, and the ideas are really universal ideas. And so I write these individual spiritual practices that each one of us can take on, including practice number one is go to the funeral. Just go to the funeral. You don't have time, you're busy, you don't know the person that well, you don't know if it's going to make a difference, but someone from your church or someone from my synagogue or someone from the neighborhood has a loss. You just show up. You will never regret showing up, right? So that's practice number one. One of learned I learned in just before COVID, there was a study that came out that said that one in three, let me remember correctly, 1 in 3 Americans does not know the name of their next door neighbors to the north and to the south of them. They don't know their neighbors' names. And 20 more than 20% of Americans say they have not one confidant in the world. There's nobody who they think they can really trust in this world. And so we're experiencing a massive societal breakdown that's contributing to our sense of loneliness. Someone said to me once, she said, I'm so worried that if I die, nobody will know. I can die in my home, and how long will it take for someone to even find out? So, one of the practices is take a weekly walk around your block, a slow walk or a slow run around your block if you're able. And I started running in my neighborhood after reading that study. My husband and I do a run every single morning around the neighborhood, and I say hello to every single neighbor. My husband calls me the mayor of our street now because now I suddenly know everybody on my street. But honestly, I'm working all the time. I have a really busy work schedule, and I didn't know my neighbors. I am taking care of a community of 1,300 households. Like I have a lot of people I'm taking care of, but I did not know my neighbors. And now I do. And so what can we take on so that we are actually enacting this ritual, not necessarily by circling this way, but by seeing each other and greeting each other and asking how people are doing and how their hearts are, and then showing up for them when something happens and they're in need, and celebrating joyous moments too, because it's not only about being together in grief, it's also about having someone to celebrate with when there's a moment of joy and celebration. And so there are many ways that we can enact this ritual. This is not like a Passover Seder where, Jews all around the world are enacting that ritual every year in the springtime. This is a very obscure ancient ritual that I'm trying to bring back into our consciousness so that we can take its wisdom and apply it to help our society heal. Thanks for that question, Louise.
Mm.
Rabbi Sharon, you're talking about us allowing ourselves to be vulnerable and not strong. So often when people are grieving, the message they get is, you have to be strong, you have to get through this. And I know it's very hard to be this vulnerable.
Yes.
And even hearing it today, I mean, I know I can be vulnerable, but it's not where I want to be. So I don't know if you can say more about that and the need for that in our culture.
Thank you, Peg. Thank you for asking that. The only disagreement I have with you is that I don't think that vulnerable means that we're not strong. I actually think it's the opposite. I think that allowing ourselves to be vulnerable is a demonstration of our strength. It's not a sign of weakness. It is our strength. And
Yeah,
here I would
I
recommend to
agree.
you the Catholic theologian Henry Nouwen, whom you might know, he wrote a lot of books, but one of them is called The Wounded Healer. And the idea is that we actually can't heal ourselves or one another unless we allow ourselves to be vulnerable. And I share in the book a story that I'm teaching this wonderful Talmud class now um, once a week. And it's incredible to do a deep dive into these ancient texts and to draw out their contemporary resonance in our time. And I just last week taught this class about one of the stories that I write about in the book about one of the great rabbis named Rabbi Yochanan, who lived in Talmudic times. He was actually in the land, in Eretz Israel, in the land of Israel, after the destruction of the temple, when some Jews were exiled, but some Jews were allowed to stay there. And they built these houses of study. And in that place, and Rabbi Yochanan suffered extraordinary loss. He lost both of his parents. His mother died in childbirth and his father soon after. So he was raised by his grandparents. And then he lost 10 children. Now,
Oh,
child mortality at the time was extremely high and very likely, but the level of loss that he experienced is profound. And it shaped who he was. And there are stories in the Talmud about this man who becomes a healer. And they argue that they imply that the reason that he was able to be a healer was because he drew upon his own grief and his own experience of loss and used that vulnerability to reach other people in a way that was true and authentic. And I want to ask you, I'm sure that people in this room have experienced it, but you know that when you've experienced a particular kind of pain, that you're able to see and experience and perhaps even offer comfort to other people who've experienced similar suffering. Not because you would want to ever experience that pain, it doesn't justify the suffering, but there is a kind of, in Nguyen's language, a fellowship of the sufferers, right? There's a kind of sacred fellowship of people who've experienced pain, who are able to see one another. And it's why, especially when I work with bereaved parents, when there's a tragedy and a child dies in the community, one of the first things they ask is, can you put me in touch with other bereaved parents? Because they need to talk to people who might be able to understand on some level the loss that they're experiencing, even though all loss is individual. And no two losses are the same. But I'll tell you, we had a horrific loss in our community a year ago when a teenager in our community died by suicide. And it was a horrible loss. And the first Shabbat after that loss, there was a man came into our synagogue who I had not met before. And he said, I'm here because I want to meet the family that just lost their child, because I too lost a child to suicide 2 years ago. And I want to tell them that they can survive this and I will help them survive. And I have experienced that many times over, where they're very similar experiences. We have a group of women in the community who've all experienced breast cancer, and they call themselves a sisterhood because when somebody's diagnosed with breast cancer now in the community, they reach out, they offer recipes and books and storytelling and crazy hats that they wore during their chemo, and they're able to connect with each other in a way that helps healing happen for both parties. And I think, Peg, that the reason that that works is because they see their vulnerability as a strength, not as a weakness, because they understand that when they're honest about the suffering, they're able to connect with each other in a way that helps them heal and helps the other person heal. Mike, I see that you have a question. Hi, nice to see you.
Hello, thank you. I love your presentation. I have 3 points. One's real quick. Also, walking a dog in a neighborhood. That's
Yes,
another way to
the
get to know
best.
people. Um, there's also that expression, rather than saying what's wrong with you, what's happened to you, and that's reminds me of what this is all about. What happened
Yes.
to you, which is very powerful. It's also a dialogue. What when the two people are passing each other, there's that dialogue, and in our day and age right now, as you alluded to, there's so much isolation, but there's also a lot of cross talking. There's
Hmm.
also a lot of yelling, and there's little, if any, dialogue.
You're
Um,
so right.
and especially with people who do not engage in empathy. So I was
Yes.
wondering if you have any words of wisdom for us, the $64,000 question, how those who have empathy can better engage in dialogue with those who do not have empathy.
Thank you so much, Mike, for asking that question. I'll try to address, I'm going to say three things in response. One, walking the dog. After my father died, my mother, I think the dog kept her alive. My mother was grieving and the dog had to walk. She had to leave her house. And is now buddies with every single neighbor, especially every neighbor with a dog. I mean, she knows all the dogs, she knows all the people. I mean, it drew her back into life again and again. So I totally agree with that. Two, just a kind of funny story, but I turned in my manuscript and then went on vacation. And Oprah came out with a book a week later called What Happened to You that she wrote with a neuroscientist in which she says that we are asking the wrong question when we deal with people who are misbehaving in our society. So say that a fourth grade kid comes into class and starts cursing and throwing things and yelling at the teacher and gets violent with another student. They get dragged to the principal's office, and the principal says, "What's wrong with you?" Right? In frustration. But it's the wrong question. The right question is, "What happened to you?" Because if they asked what happened to you, they might learn that that student that morning had been put into foster care, having been told that their parents were unfit to care for them. And if you know that, then of course they're acting out the way they're acting out, and then you can support them. So I totally agree with you. And I think that's really important. But so the reason it's funny is because nobody wants to find out after you close your manuscript before the book is published that Oprah just wrote a book essentially saying the same thing you're saying. But it turns out that she's really speaking from a kind of neuroscience perspective, and mine is from a spiritual perspective, and they really work well together. So it was very affirming actually to read her book. Um, in the eighth chapter of the book, I share a number of stories of people who turn toward those who don't seem to be holding empathy for them or for others like them with a kind of open-hearted curiosity. And I share about what it's like to do that pastorally. And maybe you've experienced this with your own religious leaders or, in your own professional life, but people bring all kinds of garbage to their clergy members, like really like a great amount of harshness and projection comes my way. And I have to continue to love my people, even when they're being inappropriate and cruel and unkind. And so I have had to learn how to sit in a room with somebody who's berating me for something that's not my fault and see through to their humanity. So I write about that in the book and some strategies that I developed to do that. But I will tell you just one story. Some of them, by the way, sometimes it works and sometimes it doesn't. But these are mechanisms of self-protection while also trying to open a door for real communication. So, the first thing is I think we have to decipher between being unsafe and uncomfortable. If we're unsafe, it's our core responsibility to get safe, right? We don't have to put that level of vulnerability, Peg, is not what I'm asking for. Right. I'm talking about a kind of emotional vulnerability that lets us see one another's pain. But if somebody's going to harm me or my loved ones, it is not my responsibility to risk my own life in order to engage their humanity. I don't think that's right. But very often we confuse what makes us unsafe and what makes us uncomfortable. And we avoid engaging in conversations that make us uncomfortable. And so so I talk about a couple of stories in that book about times that I kind of stepped into that breach where I realized that I could be safe, but I wouldn't be comfortable. And what does it mean to try to grow through that? So I'll just give you one story, which I don't know, might resonate to you. I think it's an amazing story. It's actually not mine. It's a story of one of my congregants named Hannah. Hannah grew up Orthodox and gay, which, so she said, so from the start, she had a very high tolerance for intolerance. Okay. So her family lives in Jerusalem and she lives here with her wife and their kids. And her niece was becoming bat mitzvah in Jerusalem. So she and her wife and the kids went to Jerusalem for the celebration. This was several years ago. Maybe 8 or 10 years ago now. They got there, and the Thursday before the Shabbat of the bat mitzvah was the Jerusalem Pride Parade. The Jerusalem Pride Parade is a very big deal because it's seen as a holy city, and a lot of the religious Jews, Christians, and Muslims in that city don't want a pride parade in their city. And so the people who are participating in the Pride Parade are very courageous, and they're saying, we just want to be seen in the fullness of our humanity. She went with her wife and kids, and she was 10 feet away from a young girl named Shira Banki, who was 16 years old, not gay, but there as an ally. She was murdered at the Pride Parade by an ultra Orthodox man who had that morning gotten out of prison where he sat for 10 years for trying to murder someone at the Pride Parade 10 years earlier. He got out of prison, went to the Pride Parade, and murdered a girl, the age of my son now. Hannah was there. She saw the murder happen. She was completely devastated. The whole country was devastated. I mean, I don't know if you remember hearing this news. I heard it, when it happened, and everyone was just completely horrified. She went to the Friday night dinner for the bat mitzvah, and seated across the table from her is a young man who she grew up with who had become radicalized. He was now a right-wing religious ultra-nationalist supporter of violence. And he was mouthing off at the Shabbat dinner table about how inappropriate it was for the Pride Parade to be happening in the Holy City, that it was desecrating the streets of the Holy City. And Hannah, who had just witnessed a murder, was so upset. And she thought, I can't be at this table. I have to leave. I literally can't sit in this room. I don't feel okay being in this room. But the way she described it to me was something was happening in her brain that said, even while one voice is saying, I have to leave, another voice was saying, what happened to this guy? He used to be a sweet kid. Who got to him and taught him to hate people? What happened? So she was curious. And through her curiosity, she forced herself to stay at the table. She sat through the entire meal. She never once talked to the guy. But at the end of the meal, she stood up and clinked her glass and gave a little toast to her niece and said, you are living in a time and a place where there is a growing fervor leading people, religious people, toward violence and dehumanization. But our Torah tells us to love people, to love each other. And I'm praying that you will take that Torah and help build this country into a country not of hatred and violence, but of love and peace. That's all she said. She sits down, they go through the weekend, she comes back to the United States. This guy is in turmoil. He calls the family a couple of days later and he says, my whole world turned upside down because I just spent Shabbat with people who I thought were my enemy, this lesbian couple with their kids. And I don't want any harm to come to them. They actually were wonderful people. And what she shared in her toast is what I believe. And he said, I don't know what to do with my life now. Meanwhile, 2 years later, He shows up at the Pride Parade in Jerusalem, not to protest, but to march. And he's holding a sign that says, "Love wins." And she told me I could share the story. And she said, all that I succeeded in doing was staying at the table, just not getting up and running away. And then amazingly, I closed the manuscript and she called me and she said, "Oh my God, look at the cover of one of the Israeli papers." And there was a picture of the next year, a couple years later, of the Jerusalem Pride Parade. And there's a guy with a rainbow kippah on his head, yeah, a rainbow yarmulke, and he's got a kid in a stroller and a kid on his shoulders, and they're all waving pride flags. And this is her guy. This is the guy whose life she changed because she stayed at the table. And I know it's so hard. And there are people who've hurt me so much with what they've written and said in the last 2 years that I would be happy if I never talked to them again. But I keep trying to go back to the table because I don't want us to break. And I think we have to keep pushing to see the humanity in other people, even when they don't see our humanity. I think that's the only way we survive this time. So that's my long answer to your short question, Mike. Thank you so much for asking. And I think I saw that there was one other question on the table before we close. I know we're getting kind of late. Is that hello, Zoom user, or whoever it is?
It could have been me, Sarah. But I think you got at it eventually with Mike's question in terms of so much of the discord and division is which alienates people is political, is not so much religious, is more political than not. I myself moved away from a group because they were totally on the opposite side and I couldn't listen anymore to their point of view. But when you came up with the stay at the table, I did stay at the table for quite a while. There was no budging, there was no changing, there was no accepting another point of view. I think that's perennial. I think it's not it's I understand your story and I understand exactly how long it took and how it worked. In a more political, now day-to-day thing, um, I'm getting stay at the table because I certainly don't accomplish anything by leaving. I left three
Right.
people that I played golf with them. I left. I just thought, no, I don't need this. So do you have anything to add? Mike, it's so great to see you. Mike and I worked together many, many years ago. Um, do you have
So,
anything else to add to that,
yeah.
Aaron?
Yeah, thanks for pointing this out. I mean, one of the reasons that that's a success story. Hannah's story is a success story. There are lots of stories of failure too, and I share some of them in the book of when I really tried and I could not help a person budge. And at some point to protect our own hearts, we got to leave that golf group and surround yourself by people who share your values. And there's nothing wrong with that as long as you then don't dehumanize the people who have the other perspective. And I'm not suggesting that we have to stay close friends with people, that we have to have dinner with people who really don't share our values, people who are justify acts of real cruelty toward us and toward people we love. I'm not suggesting that, but I do believe we have to work very hard not to dehumanize one another. And so I hope that that helps. And maybe it'll become, if you read in chapter 8, you'll see that there are a number of people who I tried this with who really, I think, were um, quite inhumane toward others. And they couldn't come back. They couldn't pull back from that, but you never know. There's one particular person who I share a story about who I had an infuriating conversation with. And I felt like I couldn't get them to budge. I couldn't get them to see a different perspective than they had. And then several years later, got a Google alert. There was an article about this person, and their views had changed over years. I didn't know it in the time. And if I hadn't been mentioned in the article, I would never have gotten the Google alert. I would never have seen it. So I believe that part of what we have to do is we have to live from our own values, even if we can't change another person and know that it might actually help. It might plant a seed that might help awaken them to the deeper humanity that we all share. Um, okay, I see that Tom and Elaine have your hand up, and I also have to jump momentarily. So I'll take this last question and then we can close.
Okay, thank you. I just want to say I was so deeply moved to tears by this, and it reminded me of the book that really affected me and became the center of my doctorate, The Healing Connection by Miller and Stiver.
Ooh.
And it's such an important thing. But I wanted to ask you about the title. That was the reason I raised my hand when you were rushing. I'm assuming that the amen effect has to do with being heard and prayed for, and the person says amen. But I may have missed why you named your book that.
Okay. Well, thank you for asking that question, Elaine. So one of the things I love about the word amen is that it resonates in so many different cultures and traditions. Jews say amen, Christians say amen, Muslims say amin. There's this sense of woven connection and between all of these threads. But when a person is either experiencing great joy, say you get married or your child gets married or you have a grandkid, or experiencing great pain, and they bring that joy or that pain into relationship with another person, and that person affirms their human experience, that's the amen effect or the amen effect. When we're able to say to someone at precisely the moment that we feel most like pulling away from each other, I see you. I see your joy. I see your pain. There's someone in my community who came into Shabbat services yesterday, and I greeted him, and he said, I need to talk to you. And he pulled me over and he said, but I have to do it with my wife. And he took my hand and pulled me all the way across the synagogue. And with the wife, he said, you are now looking at a brand new Savta and Zaidi, a brand new grandmother and grandfather. And he just needed to be affirmed in the joy of having had their first grandkid. And I thought, and I started to cry. I was so happy for them. And I realized, and I write about joy a lot in the book, that we have studies that say that sharing the joy brings you even more of an experience. You know this because you got your PhD in this, it sounds like, in this healing practice, but that the experience of sharing joy has more of a neurological effect than even experiencing it in the first place. So think about a couple that goes and gets engaged on a big hike, and that's wonderful. But then they get back when they have phone service again and they get to call their parents and their siblings and all their friends and put it on Instagram. That's like there's something that feeds us when we're able to share and we're affirmed from others in our celebration, in our sorrow. All of it matters. And so saying amen to someone else's pain is saying, I see that you're hurting and I'm not running away from you. Saying amen to someone else's joy is saying, I see that you're feeling joy and I affirm your joy. And I think this is how we start to stitch back the torn shreds of our communities. And if you look on the cover, do you see how there's like it looks like a fabric and it's a torn fabric, but it's being sewn back together. And I'm not going to tell you why because you have to read the book to find out, except to say I think we're tearing at the seams right now. I think our hearts are tearing apart. I think our society is tearing itself apart. And I do believe that the healing is possible and that each one of us can be part of stitching those pieces back together. So on that note, I say this with great sincerity. If any of you are ever in Los Angeles on Shabbat, on Saturday or Friday night, you're always welcome to come visit us. I hope you will. And it's nice to connect with the home front, the folks from New Jersey and from all across the East Coast. Thank you for having me today. I hope you find the book meaningful. Oh, and by the way, it's written in a way that should work for book groups. I designed it to work for book groups. So if you have small groups or you want to have dinner parties or something, and I have study guides for each chapter, which you can get on on my website. I'm going to just put the link here in case you're curious about this. I made study. Oh, here it is. Okay. I made study guides for each chapter of the book so that it would be super easy for people to sit together. Each one is designed for about an hour of learning and conversation. There's biblical text, rabbinic text. You can do text heavy or text light, whatever speaks to you. But the ideas are really meant to be engaged in conversation and in community. So thank you so much.
I
Thank
just
you.
want to say that I went on an e-car live stream and I thought it was great. I love the music. I love the feeling of the people. You could feel they were community. So I
Thank you,
just
Mary.
want to let you know that.
Thank you. You're always welcome to join us virtually from wherever you are.
Thank you.
Okay.
Bye, Sharon.
Be
It was
well,
really
people.
wonderful.
Thank you so much.
Thank you
Thank
very
you for
much.
Thank
Sharon.
you.
Thank you
so much.
Take care.
That was great. Thank you.
That was wonderful. The most powerful thing I've heard in years.
Oh my goodness. Thank you, Kenneth. Thank
Absolutely,
you.
absolutely powerful.
Thank you.
That's high praise from Ken.
I
He's a
will take
wonderful
it.
pastor.
Thank
He's a
you.
wonderful pastor.
Oh, thank you so much. I appreciate
That
you
was
all.
very beautiful. I grew up Jewish. I mean, I'm Jewish, so the amen, I think thought it meant so be it. So that's why I'm confused.
Oh, you know what? I write about the origin of the word in chapter 1. So you'll see it actually comes from the Hebrew word emunah, which means faith. And my argument is it's not just about faith in God, it's about faith in each other. That we're saying to each other, I believe you. When you say your heart's broken, I believe you. When you say your heart is full, I see you. I believe you. Okay, unfortunately, I have to jump off, but thank you all so much. And I really appreciate you. Take care.
Thank you.
Thank
Thank you.
We might ask if you would all stay on. We have a prayer to sum things up. I'm going to turn it back to Peg, but please don't leave us just yet, even though we had to say goodbye to Rabbi Sharon.
Okay. So are you going to put that up on the screen, Carol?
I will, Peg, yes.
Good, so that we can all pray it together. Okay. Everybody can see that?
Yes.
Sorry, I'm not really intending to share the little animal there, but I think you have him anyway.
Yes.
There we go.
Okay. Loving God,
Adonai,
Adonai,
Yahweh,
Yahweh,
Jehovah,
Jehovah,
Elohim,
Elohim,
Allah,
Allah,
help us
help us to have
to
wisdom,
understand
and-hearted,
that open-hearted, authentic
authentic
human
human
connection
connection is a
Spiritual
spiritual
necessity.
necessity, is the key to belonging and the antidote to loneliness,
can be the deepest expression of faith,
honoring the image of God,
Gives our
gives
lives
our
purpose
purpose
and
and
meaning.
meaning,
well,
Helps
helps
us
us
approach moments of joy
and
and
pain,
pain authentically.
helps
Helps
both
both
the
the
wounded
wounded and the hearers, and
won't
won't
save
save
us,
us,
but
but
matters
matters profoundly nonetheless.
Sound.
Amen.
Oh.
Bob, how are you doing?
Well, still about the same. I'm still recovering from the actual anesthesia and the operation. So that, and I've been told that it takes weeks. So I'm trying to be patient.
but he doesn't have the pain anymore from the neck.
Right. The original pain is gone.
Good.
Yes, indeed.
I look at all of you here that I know, and I'm really honored to know you because you all care about each other in Sophia, in the Eucharistic community, in votive. You know, you all care about each other. And I think you get this book and you get Rabbi Sharon.
Mhm.
But hearing her talk about it, I think it really frees us to know how important we are to each other.
Mhm. Mhm.
So I think we learned a lot. I don't know, I learned a lot.
Yes.
Yes, yes, yes. It was great.
And it was just wonderful to be in her presence.
Yeah,
she's very
Just
charismatic.
radiates. what
very
she's talking
optimistic
about.
too. It's just gives
Do
one
read
hope.
the thing that the Jewish Standard article, you know, because there's so much to her really young life. To me, she's young.
Right.
But
She is.
how she emerged to the way she's thinking. you know,
Mhm.
because she wasn't raised in a traditional Jewish family.
Mhm.
She says a story there that they would close the store of her parents in Madison on Christmas Eve. They would go look at Christmas lights on the way home, and then they would go watch the Ten Commandments, the movie.
It's a great article. Thank you, Bernice. It's a wonderful
Yeah.
article.
Yeah.
Thank you for
And thank
forwarding it.
you, Pat, who
Oh,
brought it
Pat,
to
it comes from
Bernice.
Pat. Thank you, Pat. It was wonderful. It's good.
Yeah.
And it's in the chat.
I just want to say I'm reminded of Ken Lash's admonition anytime he would give a homily. Can I get an amen?
All right.
Let God's people say amen, is what he
Yeah.
often says. Right, Ken?
Yes, that's right. Yes,
Let
absolutely.
God's people say amen.
Let God's people say amen.
Amen.
Black
Amen.
communities in Black churches, they're always, the preacher says something and the ladies are up, amen,
Exactly.
Amen.
Exactly.
amen.
Yep.
Yes.
So I got to go.
Yeah,
Okay, everybody. I think we
Thank you.
probably all do.
Take care.
Yeah,
Okay.
Thank you all
Being
very
with
much.
us.
wonderful.
You're
That
Bye,
welcome.
was
everyone.
Bye
really
now.
wonderful.
Good to see you all.
Fabulous.
Wonderful to have you all. Thank you.
Thank you,
Thank you.
especially you, Mary Atke.